In a previous video, we saw how we can create our 2D submittal drawings. Now let's go ahead and take a look and see how we can create our photorealistic renderings from our 3D objects. Now there's a lot involved when it comes to rendering, but we're going to go ahead and take a look at just some of the basic concepts that are needed in order to create a rendering. We'll also take a look at some of the tools that are available within Toolbox to help expedite this process. Now there's three main components that we need to add to our scene in order to create a good rendering. First thing is we're going to want to create some lights to light up the room. Then we're going to want to take a look at the materials that are currently assigned. And then we'll take a look and create a view that we want to render. So let's go ahead and add some lights to our scene. First thing that we're going to want to do is go to our Draw menu, and then from the Room Components section, select the Ceiling Mount Lighting. You can see here that we have lots of different lights that you can add into your scene, but we're going to go ahead and use a lighting grid. This allows us just to pick a center point of the room, and then it will quickly add lights throughout the entire room for us. To add this, go ahead and right-click and select Draw Ceiling Mount Lighting. Now we're just going to want to pick a spot in the middle point of our room. Now the only thing we want to be careful of when we're picking is to make sure that we don't snap to another object. We want to make sure that we're picking the floor. So go ahead and just pick an area right about here, and now we'll get our prompts interface. So from here, the first thing that we're going to want to specify is our room width and length. So to do this, we'll just go ahead and double click inside the room width, and then we'll just pick 2 points to get the general width of the room. And then we'll do the same thing for the room length. Now these don't have to be exact, as we're just trying to get a decent length there. Now you can see that we have some other prompts, and we'll go ahead and deal with these later. This allows us to turn up the intensity to make the lights brighter or dimmer. We can also add more lights by setting the distance between them, but for now let's just go ahead and hit the OK button, and we can see that we added some lights to our scene. Now even though we have some lights that are outside of our room, when we create our view, these lights won't be seen, so it's not that big of a deal that they're not inside of our room. So now let's go ahead and check out and see what materials we have assigned to our products. Now these are just rendering materials, and they're just for visualization purposes. These aren't the actual materials that we're going to use to actually manufacture these products. So to take a look and see what rendering materials we have assigned, let's go ahead and go into a 3D view. So type in SW and hit enter. And then go ahead and zoom in on just one of our products here that we've added. And then you can type in the RE command for regen, and this will make those light objects a little bit smaller just so they're out of our way. Now in order to see what rendering materials we have assigned to this, we're going to go ahead and go into a realistic view. So to do that, select our camera icon, and then the third icon down is our realistic view setting. So we go ahead and select this, and so you can quickly see the materials that are assigned to this. So you can see that we have a black countertop here, along with some dark woods and our tiled floor. So this gives us a pretty good idea of what this is going to look like. Now, if we want to change these materials, we can do so from the Change Materials icon. So go ahead and select that now, and you'll get our materials interface here. So this allows us to switch out the rendering materials that are used. To change a material, you can select a material from the left section and then select a component or a layer on the right section. You can see that the top section is divided into our room components, which contains the floors and walls and ceilings, and the lower half is showing us our product-specific layers such as our cabinet door, countertops, and other product-specific layers. To change out any of these materials, we can use our category selection on the left-hand side. So the first category that we can look at are our microvellum woods. And then you can see that from the subcategories we have lots of different woods that we can select from. Let's go ahead and just leave it on the feature woods for now. And let's go ahead and assign an apple tree to our products. So to do that, we'll go ahead and scroll down and find our apple tree material, and we'll select it here. And by selecting the apply material option there, we can see that it's applied our material that we have selected to that object. So let's go ahead and do that for our other wood materials here. We'll just quickly replace everywhere where we have our old existing material. And now that that's finished, we'll go ahead and hit close. Once we hit the close button there, we can see that we have new wood materials assigned to all of our products. So we have our materials assigned and we have our lights set up. Now let's go ahead and create the view for this. So to do that, let's go back into a plan view. So we'll type in PLAN and then just hit enter twice. And we're going to want to switch out of that realistic view that we are in. So we'll go ahead and select the wireframe view. Then we'll go ahead and zoom in on our room here. And again, I'll type in the RE just to get those lights a little bit smaller. So now we're going to want to set up a camera. And to do that, we'll do that from our views. So we'll select our view cube here. And then from our drop-down list, we'll select perspective. This is going to allow us to place a camera and then have a focus point for the camera. So we'll go ahead and zoom out a little bit, and we're going to want to pick a point just outside of the room a little bit. So we'll just pick a point here, and then drag our mouse, and we'll pick a point just outside of the upper wall there. After we've selected those 2 points, we can see that we have a 3D view just like we were inside the room. From here, you can pan around to kind of get the view set up just the way that you like. Now the last thing we do before we create our rendering is that we're going to want to check our rendering settings. We can do so by selecting the rendering settings menu item here. So we'll go ahead and select rendering settings, and this will allow us to select from several different preset rendering types. From here we can select draft, low, medium, high, or presentation. And this will just configure all the rendering settings. And if you select draft, it's going to create a very low quality image, but it's going to render very fast. And that allows us to check our lighting, make sure that all of our variables are set correctly, and that we have everything in place the way that we want it. And then when we're ready to do a really nice rendering, we can go ahead and switch to presentation. For now, let's go ahead and switch to low. And we're going to want to check to make sure that our lightings are set up correctly. So to do that, we'll go ahead and just do a test render on the low setting. And we can render straight from our rendering settings here by selecting the render button. Now this is going to give us a real quick rendering. And we can see right away that our lighting isn't exactly the way that we want it. We'll let this finish here real quick. And we can see that everything is just too intense. There's just too much light set up inside of this. So there's 2 settings that we want to check to make sure that they are set correctly. The first one is the AutoCAD variable called lighting units. You can go ahead and type that in the command line, lighting units, and we're going to want to make sure that this variable is set to 1. So right now we can see that it's set to 0, so we'll go ahead and enter in 1 and then type enter. And since that was set to 0, let's go ahead and do another real quick rendering just to verify that, to see if that has fixed our lighting settings. So we'll go to our rendering settings and then just click on the render command again. And now we can see that with that change, it's actually calculating our lighting correctly based off the lights that we've added previously. We can see that using the correct lighting units for the rendering is important to make sure that our image isn't completely washed out. Overall, this is still a little dark, and we'll look at another way to adjust the exposure in a minute. But first, let's render this again at a higher quality to get rid of the blurry lines and really help us identify how much more lighting we will need to add to our scene. Once our rendering is finished, we can see it is much more crisp and the lines aren't as jagged, but it's still a little dark. Before we look and see how we can adjust the rendering exposure, let's look at the rendering window interface. At the bottom of the rendering window, we can view the past renderings and even preview what the rendering looked like by selecting it in the list. We can also see how long it took to render that view, along with additional information about that rendering. So since this is a little dark, we want to go ahead and brighten this up. Now we can do that through changing our prompts inside of our lights that we added earlier, but there's another setting that I want to show you, and that's the rendering exposure. So go ahead in the command line and type in render exposure. And that will give us a little rendering exposure here. And this is where we can actually adjust the brightness on a global level instead of specifically for the lights. So it's going to go ahead and give us a little rendering preview. And once that preview is completed, we can change a few of these settings here. So for the brightness, let's go ahead and turn this up to 75. Now we can quickly see in the preview that the overall lighting has increased a little bit. So that's looking a lot better. Let's go ahead and just leave that setting there, and let's do one last rendering. So we'll go to our rendering settings, and we'll leave it on presentation, and we'll click our render button again. We can see that once the rendering is finished, that by adjusting the exposure, it can really brighten up the picture. And although there is still a lot we could add to our scene to bring it to life, such as other appliances and windows, I'm pretty happy with this picture and I want to save it. To do that, we can select Save from the File drop-down menu and then select a location on disk and give the file a name. As you can see, there's a lot of fine-tuning when it comes to making a great rendered picture, and hopefully I have shown you how you can use some of the tools in Toolbox and AutoCAD to help you get started making photorealistic renderings.